The morning sun over Naval Amphibious Base Coronado was already beginning to bite with the promise of another scorching California day. Inside the vast, cavernous space of the enlisted mess hall, the clatter of metal trays and the low murmur of hundreds of conversations created a white noise of military routine. It was a transient space, filled with sailors from every conceivable command. Deckhands from destroyers, technicians from the submarine base, and students from various schools passing through. Among the throng, one figure moved with quiet, unassuming purpose. She was of average height, with a lean, muscular build that was easy to miss beneath the standard-issued Navy working uniform. Her hair was pulled back tightly, and her eyes, a calm, steady gray, scanned the room with a habit that was more ingrained than conscious. It collected her tray, moving through the line with economical grace, selecting a basic breakfast of eggs and toast. She was looking for a quiet corner, a spot against the wall where she could eat in peace and review a technical manual on her phone. Her mind was far from the mess hall, still half lost in the complexities of a new communications protocol her platoon was set to test next week. She found a small table near the back, set her tray down, and was just pulling out her phone when the atmosphere in her immediate vicinity changed. 5 of them approached from different angles, a coordinated, practiced movement that suggested they had spotted her earlier and planned this. They were all men, all wearing the uniforms of sailors, but with a distinct swagger that marked them as being from a specific community. They were big, gym-built, with the tanned skin and confident grins of those who considered themselves the apex predators of the naval food chain. They were graduates of a rigorous screening program, candidates for the legendary Special Warfare Units. In the unofficial hierarchy of the Navy, they were near the top, and they knew it. The apparent leader, a muscular second class with a shaved head and a tattoo of a trident peeking from his sleeve, pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down, uninvited. His 4 friends fanned out, 2 sliding into the bench seat beside her, boxing her in, and the other 2 standing at the end of the table, their arms crossed. The move was designed to intimidate, to assert dominance. They saw a woman alone, a master-at-arms, which in their world was a shore-duty job, a soft billet. To them, she was an easy target for the morning's entertainment. "Morning, sweetheart," the leader said, his voice loud enough to carry, but not so loud as to draw immediate attention from the senior chiefs at the far end of the hall. "Mind if we join you? Looks a little lonely over here in the corner." Sarah didn't look up from her phone. "Suit yourself." The lack of reaction was not the one they expected. They were used to a flicker of annoyance, maybe a polite but nervous smile or an attempt to leave. Her flat, disinterested tone was a blank wall. It only encouraged them. Tough crowd," one of the men beside her chuckled, leaning in a little closer than was comfortable. "What's a pretty thing like you doing in a place like this? Shouldn't you be writing parking tickets outside the PX?" A ripple of laughter went through the group. Sarah took a slow, deliberate bite of her toast, chewing thoughtfully. She still hadn't looked up. The leader leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Hey, we're talking to you. It's called manners. Where I come from, when someone shows you attention, you give it back." He gestured vaguely at his chest. "We just got done with a 30-mile hump with full packs. We're the real deal, the teams. You know what I mean?" This was the key. But this was the point where most people would either try to pacify them with a quick smile and a, "That's nice," or they'd show a flash of fear. Sarah did neither. She finally locked her phone and placed its screen down on the table. She looked directly at the leader, her gray eyes holding his without a flicker. The silence stretched for a beat too long. "Congratulations," she said, her voice level and quiet. "That's a long walk." The man beside her, emboldened by her perceived passivity, made a crucial mistake. He reached out and tapped the name tape on her chest. "Jenkins," he read aloud, grinning at his friends. "Hey, Jenkins, you ever think about a real challenge? You know, instead of chasing shoplifters, you try and do what we do? Think you could handle a 20-mile hump with 100 pounds on your back? This was the moment. At the moment, the air in the small pocket around their table seemed to solidify. The background noise of the mess hall faded for Sarah, replaced by a hyper-focused clarity. The man's hand was still in her peripheral vision, the tap on her chest a physical violation of space that every fiber of her being was trained to respond to. The rules of the game had just changed. They weren't just being obnoxious, they had made it physical. And in her world, a physical initiation demanded a physical and definitive response. She slowly placed her fork down, the metal clinking softly against the tray. The sound was unnervingly loud in the sudden stillness of their group. The smiles on their faces began to waver, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Something was wrong. The woman in front of them hadn't shrunk back. She hadn't called for help. And she had just stopped. And in that stillness, they sensed a predator far larger than themselves. 20 miles, Sarah repeated, her voice still quiet, but now carrying an edge that cut through their bravado. With a 100-pound pack? Yeah, I've done it. A few times. Usually at night. In the water. The leader's brow furrowed. What are you talking about? MAs don't... He didn't get to finish the sentence. Sarah moved. It wasn't a fast movement, not in the way a barroom brawler is fast. It was a movement of pure, distilled efficiency. Her right hand, which had been resting on the table, shot out. There was no wind-up, no tell. Her palm struck the underside of his outstretched wrist, a short, sharp blow that sent his arm flying back and his elbow slamming onto the table with a painful crack. At the exact same instant, but her left arm came up in a blur, the side of her hard forearm connecting with the throat of the man sitting to her left. It wasn't a full-force strike, but a precise, controlled application of pressure to the windpipe. He made a choked, gagging sound and fell sideways off the bench, clawing at his neck. Before the other man on her right could even process what was happening, she had pivoted on the bench. Her right hand, now free, shot out and grabbed the front of his uniform collar. Using his own seated momentum and a twist of her core, she yanked him forward and down, his face smashing into the remains of her breakfast with a sickening crunch of cartilage and breaking ceramic plate. The two men standing at the end of the table lunged forward, their training finally kicking in. But they were used to fighting fair, to sparring with rules. On the bench like water, driving her shoulder the bench like water, driving her shoulder into the solar plexus of the oncoming man. The air whooshed out of him as he doubled over, and she brought her knee up in a short, brutal arc that connected squarely with his face as it came down. The last man, the fifth one, had a split second to see his four friends neutralized. The leader was clutching his numb arm, the second was on the floor gasping, the third was slumped over the table with blood pouring from his nose, and the fourth was crumpled in a heap, groaning. It was utter chaos, and it had taken less than 8 seconds. He froze, his fighter's instinct screaming at him to engage, but his mind utterly unable to reconcile the image of the quiet woman from a minute ago with the human weapon now standing before him. Sarah straightened up. She wasn't even breathing hard. She took a single, deliberate step towards the chaos around her. A thin line of blood from a small cut on her own hand, caused by the broken plate, was the only sign she had exerted herself. She took a single, deliberate step towards him. He instinctively took a step back, his hands coming up in a defensive posture that was pure reflex, his eyes wide. It was in that moment of silence, punctuated only by groans, that the first of the real spectators arrived. A grizzled senior chief, his own tray in his hand, had stopped mid-stride about 20 feet away. He had seen the entire thing unfold from the periphery. He walked forward slowly, his eyes moving from the 5 downed men to Sarah, who was now calmly pulling a paper napkin from the dispenser to wipe the blood from her knuckles. The senior chief, A man who had been in the community for over 2 decades, with a chest full of ribbons that told stories of combat and valor, looked at her with a new, profound respect. He didn't ask what happened. He knew. He'd seen that kind of efficiency before. He saw it in the kill house, in the desert, in the split-second reactions of men who had been forged in the same fire. He looked at the 5 men, one of whom was now trying to sit up, spitting out a mouthful of egg and blood. "What's your name, petty officer?" the senior chief asked, his voice calm. Sarah finished wiping her hand. "Jenkins, senior chief." He gave a slow, understanding nod. He didn't ask for her command. And he could guess. "Carry on." Just then, the first of the base's shore patrol arrived, alerted by a frantic mess hall worker. The scene was a public relations nightmare in the making. 5 men down, a woman standing calmly in the middle of it. But as the patrolman moved in, another figure appeared. A lieutenant commander, lean and fit, who had been eating with his back to the commotion. He turned, took in the scene with a single sweeping glance, and walked directly to Sarah. He looked at the downed men, then at her. "Jenkins, report." "They initiated unwanted physical contact, sir. I defended myself and de-escalated the situation to prevent further harm to myself." De-escalated. The word hung in the air. The lieutenant commander, her actual commanding officer from an unmarked command a few miles away on the other side of the base, a place so secret its very existence was classified, hid a smile. He looked at the 5 special warfare candidates. One was being helped to his feet, still clutching his throat. Another was being attended to by a corpsman who had magically appeared. The leader, the one with the shaved head, was staring at Sarah with an expression that was slowly dawning into horrified realization. He had seen her move. He had felt the impossible speed and precision of her strike. He had watched her dismantle 4 men who had just passed the Navy's most difficult physical screening. And in that moment, the pieces fell into place. The quiet demeanor, the absence of fear, the lethal grace. It wasn't an act. It was the hallmark of a different kind of training, a more intense, more brutal, more complete form of warfare. It was the kind of quiet that came from knowing, with absolute certainty, that you were the most dangerous person in any room. "Wait," the man with the broken nose managed, his voice muffled and thick. "What? Who are you?" Sarah looked at him, then at the others. The lieutenant commander stood beside her, a silent testament to her true value. The senior chief from the teams watched with grim satisfaction, knowing that 5 young men were about to learn a very painful, very public lesson. Sarah didn't answer. She didn't need to. The lieutenant commander did it for her. He looked at the shore patrol and then at the 5 battered recruits. "These men harassed and assaulted a United States Navy SEAL," he said, his voice clear and cold. "Take their names. Their commands will be notified." The word SEAL landed like a bomb in the middle of the mess hall. A woman. A SEAL. The ultimate irony was not lost on anyone who understood the community's long and difficult journey to integration. She was one of the first, one of the few who had passed a course designed to break the human spirit, who had endured Hell Week in the freezing surf, who had completed the punishing training and emerged as a special warfare operator, equal to any man in the teams. The 5 recruits stood frozen, their faces a tableau of shock, shame, and a dawning, horrific understanding of their own monumental stupidity. They hadn't cornered a lonely M.A. They had tried to bully a ghost, a silent professional whose job was to operate in the shadows, to be the point of the spear in the nation's most dangerous conflicts. And they had challenged a woman who could kill them with her bare hands in more ways than they could count, and who had shown almost unimaginable restraint by only leaving them with broken bones and bruised egos. Sarah picked up her phone from the table. She looked at her commanding officer. "Sir, am I cleared to return to duty?" The lieutenant commander nodded once. "Dismissed, Jenkins, and good work." She stepped over the groaning man on the floor without a second glance and walked towards the exit. As she passed the table of the senior chief from the teams, he gave her a subtle nod of recognition, a warrior's salute. She acknowledged it with the slightest dip of her head. The mess hall, which had been a hive of noise, was now unnervingly quiet. Hundreds of sailors had witnessed the aftermath, if not the event itself. As Sarah pushed through the door and out. As Sarah pushed through the door and out into the bright California sun, the tension finally began to leave her shoulders. She flexed her hand, the small cut already forgotten. It was an annoyance, a distraction from the real work. She wouldn't be getting a commendation for this. If anything, there would be paperwork, a quiet inquiry, and then it would be buried. That was the way of the teams. You didn't seek glory in the mess hall. You sought it in the dark, on the objective, with your teammates at your side. She walked towards the unmarked van that was waiting for her at the curb. Dee got in. She shrugged. Recruiting duty. Got in. She shrugged. Recruiting duty, she muttered. The van pulled away, leaving the mess hall and its stunned occupants behind. The 5 recruits would have a long, painful recovery, both physically and in terms of their reputation. Their journey to the teams was likely over before it had truly begun. They had learned a lesson that no training command could ever teach. Never judge a book by its cover, and never, ever corner someone in a mess hall without knowing exactly who they are. Because in the world of special operations, the quietest people are often the ones who have the most to be quiet about. And half a minute was all it took for 5 arrogant men to discover that the woman they had chosen to bully was, in fact, one of the deadliest operators in the United States military.